So I'm going to be signing a national emergency. And it's been signed many times before. It's been signed by other presidents. From 1977 or so, it gave the presidents the power. There's rarely been a problem. They sign it. Nobody cares. I guess they weren't very exciting. But nobody cares. They sign it for far less important things in some cases, in many cases.
President Donald Trump today declared a national emergency to get his border wall built. The president announced his decision this morning from the Rose Garden. And this comes after Congress passed a compromise funding bill that did not include all the money that he demanded. In the bill, lawmakers designated nearly $25 billion for border security. But it only includes nearly $1.4 billion for actual barriers. With his executive action, the president plans to spend $8 billion on the wall. $3.5 billion be diverted from the Defense Department's military construction budget. Another $2.5 billion will come from the Pentagon's drug interdiction program. $600 million will come from the Treasury Department's drug forfeit fund. Here's what the president had to say today about the move.
We're going to be signing today and registering national emergency. And it's a great thing to do because we have an invasion of drugs, invasion of gangs, invasion of people, and it's unacceptable. I could do the wall over a longer period of time. I didn't need to do this, but I'd rather do it much faster.
In response, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer called the move unlawful. They released a statement vowing to defend their constitutional authorities in Congress, in the courts, and in the public, using every remedy available. For more, I want to turn to Zeke Miller. He's a CBSN political contributor and White House reporter for the Associated Press, and CBS News chief congressional correspondent Nancy Cortez, who joins us from the Hill. So, Zeke, the president waited nearly 2 months before declaring an emergency. They went into today's announcements with this understanding. How did the White House decide on exactly where to get this funding from?
Well, they looked at a whole bunch of places. Mick Mulvaney, who's previously director of Office of Management and Budget, had spent the last several months scouring the federal budget, looking for pots of money that could be redirected. Some of the obvious ones, like drug forfeiture money, that they had sort of easily set on. They had looked at other areas like disaster relief funding, but that was quickly abandoned because it would have been a political non-starter, would have started a national uproar over rediverting hurricane relief funds, for instance, from Puerto Rico to fund the wall on the border. But that was one of the big pots of money that they were looking at. And now they're going after a Pentagon construction budget. It's not precisely clear yet which projects that the Pentagon wants to have built that Congress has appropriated money for would be delayed so that some of this money can be redirected. But also that's partly dependent on what happens with the courts and in Congress going forward.
So, Nancy, when we're looking at the perspective from the Hill, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Senator Chuck Schumer are vowing to fight this move. Do we know how they might do that?
Yes, we do. At least we have the broad outline because they've now said that they will take legal action. They will try to challenge this move in the courts, try to get it declared unconstitutional, a fight that the president himself acknowledged today might go all the way to the Supreme Court. And they're going to try to fight it here on Capitol Hill, most likely by introducing a joint resolution that would try to get this national emergency declaration overturned. But beyond that, they're now also starting to say that they will hold hearings as well. Zeke just talked about the fact that the president is going to try to get some of this money, for example, from the Department of Defense. And it's not as if there are just pots of money sitting around that you could just repurpose. This is money that has already been dedicated to other projects. And so what the chair of the Armed Services Committee in the House, Adam Smith, Democrat of Washington State, just said a short time ago is that Congress must conduct oversight to identify exactly which projects supporting service members and their families the president has chosen to value less than this political stunt, unquote. So they could hold some pretty explosive hearings examining, okay, what are you going to stop spending money on, money that Congress has already appropriated in order to build the wall. And what is the public more broadly going to think about that? We already know, based on polling done by CBS News and other news outlets, that a majority of Americans don't think that the president should be declaring a national emergency. How will they feel if, for instance, some pretty important projects are being starved of funding in order for him to build that wall?
Zeke, to Nancy's point about this growing chorus in the Democrats about this being unconstitutional, the president dismissed the criticism that by doing this that he's violating the Constitution. I want to play for you a little bit of what he had to say about the likely court battle.
We will have a national emergency, and we will then be sued, and they will sue us in the Ninth Circuit, even though it shouldn't be there. And we will possibly get a bad ruling, and then we'll get another bad ruling, and then we'll end up in the Supreme Court, and hopefully we'll get a fair shake, and we'll win in the Supreme Court, just like the ban. They sued.
Zeke, how confident is the White House in their case, especially as if it will head to court?
Well, they are confident it will go to the courts, that there will be a legal challenge as the president laid out there. And they are not as confident as the president led on there. The president is waging as much a public relations campaign as he is a legal one here. He wants to try to turn the tide of public opinion on this issue. But as this goes through, the president has been warned time and time again by his attorneys, both inside the White House and the Department of Justice, advisors on Capitol Hill, and the like, that this is a tough case to make. And partly, we heard earlier in the show, some of the president's undermining his own argument, saying he didn't really want to do this, but he wanted to build the wall faster than if he was allowing Congress to sort of take its time and using the sort of the drip by drip funding that he has had so far. That's the sort of rhetoric that the president sort of giving fodder to the case against this sort of action. Those are the challenges here the president has, is that sometimes he's often his own worst lawyer, and he should leave some of the litigating to the attorneys rather than trying to do it out in public.
And Zeke, the president cited other presidents have declared national emergencies. Does that in any way make this case different?
It does, in the sense that other presidents have declared national emergencies. The president has cited President Obama, President Bush, President Clinton. None of them have used national emergencies to make an end run around funding that Congress has already declined on multiple occasions to appropriate. That could be a particular argument, that a piece of information that would be different, particularly if it got to the Supreme Court. This is an area where the president is trying to, Congress has appropriated this money, and the president is saying, I don't like how you're appropriating it. I need it here on this wall. Even when they had the opportunity to vote multiple times on giving him the wall funding, that's going to be an issue for him in the courts, and that the White House really doesn't have an answer to that one just yet.
Nancy, it was interesting watching Senator Mitch McConnell yesterday. He clearly has the back of the president on this, but other congressional Republicans haven't been as supportive. Do you think this sets a precedent for Republicans as well? Could they potentially regret going on the record with this?
Sure, and I mean, even Mitch McConnell is a newcomer to this position. McConnell has been saying for weeks that he really hopes the president doesn't declare a national emergency. But clearly he felt that it was important to get behind this once A, the president said, I'm going to do it, and B, because he really needed the president's assurances that he was going to sign this border security deal that didn't give the president all the wall funding that he wanted, but would prevent another partial government shutdown. So yes, this is going to be very agonizing for Republicans to figure out where they want to come down on this, and Democrats are going to force them to come down one way or the other if they introduce this joint resolution that lawmakers would all have to vote on that says whether or not they think that this is a true national emergency. And you can look to a hearing that was held here on Capitol Hill just a couple of weeks ago. The president's own top intelligence and national security officials testified about the biggest worldwide threats that the U.S. is facing right now, and illegal border crossings barely registered. They were asked about it, but they really never emphasized the fact that this is, as the president has argued repeatedly, including today, that this is a major crisis that has to be addressed. And so Democrats are taking their cues from those officials. Republicans, some of them are as well, and they urge the president not to go this route. Some of them have come around. They don't want to get crosswise with the president, but others, like Marco Rubio of Florida, Susan Collins of Maine, have reiterated since the president made this announcement that they are still against the idea of a national emergency. They think it sets a bad precedent, and they think that there are better ways for the president to go about this.
Donald Trump has fired off an angry tweet over revelations there was high-level talk to have him removed from office. In it, he quotes the views of Harvard Law Professor Emeritus Alan Dershowitz, who happens to be the latest guest on RT's Worlds Apart show, the host of which, Oksana Boyko, joins me live now in the studio. Oksana, good to see you. Now, apparently this talk to have Trump removed focused on the 25th Amendment. Did Dershowitz comment on the legality of this?
Yes, absolutely. We talked a lot about it, and this whole discussion was triggered by the latest revelations by former FBI Deputy Chief Andrew McCabe, who, on record, admitted that the Justice Department officials indeed considered back in 2017 invoking the 25th Amendment to remove Donald Trump from office. Now, that amendment provides for a process of discharging a sitting president if he is mentally or physically incapacitated. But according to Alan Dershowitz, this by no means applies to Trump because he's physically fit. You may disagree with his policies, and a lot of people do, but that is not the ground for invoking this amendment. And according to some people on the Trump side, that was as close as the United States has ever come to an administrative coup when a group of unelected security officials get together and discuss removing a democratically elected president from office, which was, according to Dershowitz, an abuse of power. Well, let's listen to what he had to say.
Terrible abuse of the Constitution. The Constitution provides for impeachment. That's a political, legal remedy. But the 25th Amendment was designed for people who had a stroke, or President Reagan when he was shot. When you're incapacitated, when you're unconscious, when you're unable to be the president, it provides a mechanism for replacing the president with the vice president. It was never intended to be used to rid the country of a president who people don't agree with, or who they think may have committed obstruction of justice or collaboration with Russia.
Well, we know Trump faces more pressure in the form of the ongoing Mueller investigation into alleged Russian collusion. So what did Dershowitz say about this?
He was very critical of the way the Mueller investigation is being carried out, because remember, almost 2 years into this probe, we still don't have a single indictment that relates to the original crime that it was supposed to investigate, which is the collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians. We have a number of indictments based on the so-called process crimes, when you arrest a person, when you interrogate him, when you or her, when you essentially set up a moral trap to see if he would lie to the prosecutors. And indeed, a couple of people did, but none of them was or has been charged with being directly involved with the Russians. And one interesting point that Dershowitz makes is that even if Trump administration officials had some contacts with the Russians, having a contact in and of itself is not enough to support the collusion charge.
Well, first of all, even if there were collusion between the Trump campaign and some Russians, that would not be a crime. It's not a crime to collude. It would be a crime only if members of the Trump campaign, or any campaign, urged people in another country to commit a crime like hacking the emails of their opponents, the Democratic National Committee. But there's no evidence of that at all. And I suspect in the end, what they'll find is there was some people in the campaign who had contacts with some people in Russian intelligence, perhaps some contact with WikiLeaks and contact with others, but they're not going to be able to make a case for the government of Russia colluding illegally with the presidential candidate, Donald Trump.
We are running this interview in full this coming Sunday, and I think it raises a number of very interesting points about the length to which some Americans are willing to go to remove Trump from office, and what they're willing to sacrifice in the process of doing that, which, according to Dershowitz, is the Constitution and the rule of law.
Poland has signed a massive missile delivery deal with America. The signing marked the start of U.S. Vice President Mike Pence's visit to Warsaw. Here's what the Polish president had to say.
I'm delighted that the US Vice President's visit started on such an important and symbolic note, with the signing of an agreement on future deliveries to Poland of high-mobility artillery rocket systems. These will be key to upgrading Poland's defences.
Let's have a quick look at Poland's new kit. The system consists of a light multiple rocket launcher on a wheel chassis designed to knock out artillery, light armour and personnel carriers. It can carry up to 6 rockets, maximum range 300 kilometers. Now, the full delivery should be completed by 2023. Warsaw says this level of expenditure is necessary due to the threat posed by Russia. And we got a reaction from former Pentagon security analyst Michael Maloof.
Well, according to Poland, it's to bolster their defenses against Russia and as part of their NATO commitment. And this is being backed and supported by the United States because it fits their narrative of Russia being a major threat to Europe. But Russia has not threatened Poland, but they feel that they're going to be safer as a consequence of these purchases. It also helps the U.S. defense industry because it is $500 million.
The time has come for our European partners to stand with us and the Iranian people, to stand with our allies and friends in the region. The time has come for our European partners to withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal and join with us as we bring the economic and diplomatic pressure necessary to give the Iranian people, the region, and the world the peace, security, and freedom they deserve.
This is what's left of the 2 buses worst hit by the blast. Inside were some 70 Indian soldiers. They were traveling back to their units in Indian-controlled Kashmir after a leave in a convoy of some 78 vehicles carrying 2,500 security personnel. Reports say a car loaded with explosives rammed into the buses, leading to the deadliest attack on Indian forces in 2 years.
Attack on Central Reserve Police Force in Pulwama is despicable. I strongly condemn this dastardly attack. The sacrifices of our brave security personnel shall not go in vain.
Local news outlets report a militant group that Jaish-e-Mohammed claimed responsibility for the attack. The same group had already carried out the previous most deadly car bombing in Kashmir in 2001, where 40 people were killed. The militants demanding India's departure from the part of Kashmir it controls. The insurgency has killed tens of thousands of civilians. India has accused Pakistan of fueling the crisis, which Pakistan denies.
The number of children living in conflict zones has doubled since the end of the Cold War. Now, translating that means a new report by the charity Save the Children that 1 in 5 youngsters around the globe now live in areas affected by armed conflict.
جيت هذه قذيفة وكنت أول ما ضربوا حرقت صيحت ورجعت. أنا أحس الآن ظهري يلمنا ما تلمنا هذه زيادة نفس ظهري انقطعوا لي اللحم العملية ما تلمنا.
واني رحت أنا بعدني بعز شبابي أنا يوم راحت يدي دمرت حياتي مستقبلي كله راح. يعني لمن نقول لمن نسأل. الله أنا فقدت هسه أنا أتمنى لا أنا أغار الطفل الصغير اللي يقول بابا أنا من عندي أغار.
جو احنا في الباص راح صاروا في الباص جاو احنا رايحين ندرس. مبلغ في هنية شظية في عيني هنا عند عيني وشظية هنية دخلت هنا دخلت هنا.
Some 420 million children live in conflict zones, and at least 1,000 die as a result every year. Since 2010, the number of recorded cases of rights violations against children has almost tripled. That includes cases of killing, maiming, abduction, and sexual violence. The increase comes despite many of the world's most powerful figures campaigning for the protection of young people in war zones.
Forces continued their advance, bearing down on the city of Benghazi, home to nearly 700,000 men, women, and children.
Prevent images of emaciated children.
How many more children have to die?
The horrific humanitarian disaster that is killing tens and tens of thousands of defenseless children.
The death of children, the destruction of hospitals, all that is a massacre which needs to be condemned.
Our report today shows that right now almost 1 in 5 children on the planet are living in conflict zones. That's more than at any time in the last 2 decades. Not only that, but the consequences of living in these war zones are catastrophic. We estimate that around 300 babies are dying due to the consequences of war every single day. Well, in 2017, 420 million children worldwide were living in areas affected by conflict. That was an increase of 30 million on the previous year. So what this is part of a really disturbing global trend where more and more children are being caught up in conflict. The international systems that ensure accountability are breaking down so that when people commit crimes against children, they know they can get away with it. So what we're calling on is for the government to stand up for children in war zones and ensure that when people do perpetrate crimes against children, they're held to account.
To Kenya now, where authorities are cracking down on al-Shabaab terrorists. 17 alleged recruits have been arrested in the southeastern part of the country. This comes after January's deadly attack at a prominent hotel and business complex in Nairobi. Deborah Pata is there in the region with more on what officers are doing to prevent al-Shabaab from gaining ground.
We're here in northern Kenya near the Samburu Game Reserve, a rather unlikely place, one would think, for al-Shabaab potential recruits to have been arrested, given the fact that the reserves around here are full of dangerous wildlife, and it's a good 370 miles from the Somali border where they were supposedly headed. But security experts say that what this points to is a possible new strategy by al-Shabaab. Previously, al-Shabaab would cross into Kenya via Garissa, the border between Kenya and Somalia, and you'll recall the site of the awful Garissa massacre in 2014, perpetrated by al-Shabaab on the university there, in which over 140 students were gunned down by al-Shabaab militants. Now, that used to be the way that al-Shabaab crossed into this country, but security has been tightened in the last 5 years since that attack, and that is now a no-go area for them. So it seems that this is a new circuitous route to get Kenyan recruits into Somalia. Security experts also say that what is happening is that al-Shabaab is continuing to recruit in Kenya with increasing frequency. There were 17 recruits in all, potential recruits, 15 of them men, 2 of them women, and they were going to be moved into Somalia. And what we're also seeing is that al-Shabaab, which is linked to al-Qaeda, is also focusing on recruits not necessarily only from poor backgrounds, but from middle-class urban backgrounds as well. The recent Nairobi attack in January, in which 21 people, including one American, Jason Spindler, were killed, also showed that one of the perpetrators of that attack was middle class. He was the son of a senior Kenyan military officer. And so that seems to be their strategy, is to bring Kenyans into it, which is very alarming for counterterrorism units. Now, the Kenyan counterterrorism units are doing their best. They received intelligence that there were these potential recruits in a safe house not too far from here. But sadly, they battle often to bring these cases further and to prosecution. Just a few days ago, the case was dropped by a magistrate in court who said there was not enough evidence to take this through to prosecution and have an actual proper case. This country remains on high alert since the Nairobi attack. The United States has also put out a warning saying that Westerners could be targeted in this country and that they should stay away from public places, malls, places of worship, universities, and other such places. So this country still on high alert.
Kurt Martens is a professor of canon law at the Catholic University of America. He joins us now from Washington. Professor, I went to Catholic school all of my life except college. And listen, defrocking is something they taught us about in school, but I mean, very few people get defrocked, especially cardinals. Am I wrong to see this as a huge story?
No, it's not wrong. It's actually a very huge story because defrocking is not actually the correct term. We call it dismissal from the clerical state. So someone who's been a priest is now dismissed from the clerical state, is no longer supposed to be a priest, can no longer present himself as a priest. So it's basically the death penalty for clerics, if you want, because it's a perpetual penalty. You cannot come back. You have to change your life now.
Okay, so if it's not defrocking, what exactly is defrocking as defined?
It's basically dismissal from the clerical state, because defrocking is the colloquial term that we use for saying the same thing. Right?
Okay, the same thing. All right. So we know We know that the former Cardinal McCarrick is the highest ranking church member to get defrocked in colloquial terms. How often does this happen in church history?
It doesn't happen too often. Actually, if you look at the crisis that we have been experiencing here in the States since 2002, we have seen priests defrocked, although exact numbers are not available. When it comes to bishops or church leaders, that happens very rarely. We've seen McCarrick now. We've seen a bishop in Canada, in Antigonish, Bishop Leahy, who was defrocked, and we've seen 2 retired Chilean bishops being defrocked in the past 2 decades. So it's not much. So it's very significant.
You know, having been an altar boy and a Eucharistic minister and gone to Catholic school, Professor, I've seen the power that bishops have, right? It's almost supreme power, at least when it comes to the church. But within the last decade or so, maybe last 5 years, it seems as though bishops are sort of losing, I don't know, a little bit of their ask no questions, they say what they want, and they don't respond to whatever they want to talk to. They're being compelled now to do more, say more, act faster. Is that accurate?
That is accurate, at least because it is a credibility crisis. Their credibility is at stake. However, they still have in the church's system the highest power that is possible, a bishop for his diocese and a pope for the whole church. So the decision today, when you look at the statement of the Holy See, it includes abuse of power as an aggravating circumstance. That is pretty significant. It means that abuse of power is something that will be looked at in the context of these crimes.
What is the reaction within the church? So externally, from non-faithful, they see this as a huge black mark on another black mark on the church's reputation. For Catholics, it's somewhat embarrassing. What is the view as you've heard it inside the church?
Inside the church, it's hard to say there is this or that view. There are mixed views. It's for sure that there are still supporters. There are people who said that this should have happened years ago. So there is a mixed approach. It's not a happy day for Catholics today because this should not have happened in the first place. For victims, it's a huge step forward because their story is believed and there is given some consequences to it.
What does this do to Pope Francis's reputation? And in that I mean his reputation as perceived by some as being more involved, stronger. Not everybody feels that way, but some do. What does this do to his reputation?
Well, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, to use a colloquial expression again. We will have to see how this transpires to the future and what further cases will lead to. There is still the pending appeal of Archbishop Apuron, the Archbishop of Guam, a US territory, who was accused of sexual abuse of minors, predating his episcopal ordination. However, that man was not dismissed from the clerical state. He appealed the decision that found him guilty, and it sits now with the Pope. So it depends on how the Pope deals with this. Do we see now a kind of zero tolerance towards behavior by bishops?
Next week, the Pope is going to meet with bishops from around the world. Who exactly has been summoned to Rome for this meeting?
Well, the people that have been summoned to Rome for this meeting are primarily presidents of episcopal conferences, so the leaders of the church in a given nation, and also Eastern hierarchs from the Eastern Catholic churches. What to expect from this meeting, that's a whole other question.